The slap echoed through the marble halls of the Kwan estate like a gunshot. It shattered the silence of Seoul's most powerful household in an instant. Zara stood frozen, her hand still stinging, her chest rising and falling fast beneath her maid's uniform. Every instinct in her body was screaming at her to run. But she did not move. In front of her was Seo Yeon, fiancée of the most dangerous man in Seoul, daughter of one of Korea's oldest crime families, stumbled backward. Her hand flew to her cheek. Her eyes went wide, not with pain, with pure, disbelieving shock. Nobody had ever dared, not once, not ever. The entire receiving hall froze. 12 staff members, 4 armed guards, 2 syndicate men near the far wall. All of them, stone still. Not one person made a sound. The only noise in that enormous room was the soft drip of hot tea sliding off the hem of Zara's uniform and hitting the marble floor. Drip, drip, drip. Seo Yeon's shock lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then her face twisted. "You," her voice came out low and shaking, "you insignificant little rat." She straightened up slowly, her eyes dragging over Zara from head to toe, like she was looking at something stuck to the bottom of her shoe. "Do you have any idea what I can do to you? Do you know who I am?" Zara knew exactly who she was. That was the problem. She had known for 3 months. 3 months of swallowing her pride, 3 months of cleaning up deliberate messes, accepting blame for things she never did, and keeping her mouth shut because she needed this job. Because her brother's school fees were due. Because her mother's bills back home did not pay themselves. 3 months of Seo Yeon treating her like she was less than the marble she scrubbed every morning. And then 20 minutes ago, the tea. Not an accident. Seo Yeon had looked her directly in the eyes before she tilted that tray. She had smiled slowly, tilted the entire tray forward, and let the hot liquid soak through Zara's uniform and burn her skin. Then she had laughed. Actually laughed, and said in front of everyone, "Clean it up. That's what you're here for." That was when Zara's hand moved. She hadn't planned it, and she hadn't thought it through. 3 months of pain had made the decision all by itself, and now here they were. Seo Yeon took 1 step toward her. "I will have you thrown out of this country before sunrise. I will make sure you never work again. I will, Miss Seo." 2 words, quiet, calm, absolutely terrifying. Every single person in that room turned toward the staircase. He was standing at the top, both hands in his pockets. Dark suit, dark eyes, a face that gave away absolutely nothing. Not anger, not surprise, not anything at all. Kwon Jae-won looked like a man who had never once been in a hurry because nothing in this world would dare move without his permission. He began walking down the stairs. Slow, deliberate. Each step landing with quiet authority. His eyes were not on Seo Yeon. They were on Zara, steady and direct, without blinking, like she was the only person standing in that enormous room, and he was seeing something he had never expected to find here. Zara's blood ran cold. She had worked in this estate for 3 months and had never once been in the same room as Kwon Jae-won. The staff had rules about that. Unspoken rules. When he entered a room, you found a reason to leave it. When he was nearby, you became invisible. You did not speak unless spoken to. You did not make eye contact. You did not, under any circumstances, make yourself memorable. She had broken every single one of those rules in the last 30 seconds. He reached the bottom of the stairs. The room was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. He stopped. He looked at Seo Yeon once, 1 single cold glance, and said 2 more words. "Leave. Now." Seo Yeon opened her mouth. He looked away from her before she could speak, like she was already gone, like she no longer existed in the room. That was more terrifying than any threat he could have made. Seo Yeon's hands balled into fists at her sides. The fury on her face was white hot, but underneath it, clearly and unmistakably, was fear. She snatched her bag from the nearest chair, stabbed her heels into the marble floor with every angry step, and walked out. The doors slammed shut behind her. Silence. Jaewon turned back to Zara. The staff stood rigid against the walls, their eyes fixed on the floor, not daring to witness whatever was about to happen next. He studied her face the way a person studies something they cannot quite explain. Unhurried, precise, still giving nothing away. Then quietly, so quietly that only she could hear it, he said, "My study. 5 minutes." He turned and walked away, and Zara stood there in her tea-soaked uniform, in the middle of that silent marble hall, with every staff member staring at her with the exact same expression on their faces. Not pity, fear. Because they all understood something that Zara was only beginning to realize. Kwon Jae-won had just looked at her like she was interesting, and in his world, that was the most dangerous thing she could possibly be. Before we continue with this story, I want you to do something real quick. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Your comments fuel these stories. If you love drama, dark romance, and stories that will have you screaming at your screen, hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell right now. Trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next. Zara had not come to Seoul looking for trouble. She had come for the money. Simple as that. 26 years old, born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, the firstborn of a woman who had worked her whole life with her hands and never once complained about it. Zara had grown up understanding one thing very clearly. Nobody was coming to save you. You saved yourself. You built your life brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice, and you did not stop building until everyone you loved was safe. That was the deal she had made with herself at 17. She was still keeping it. The staffing agency had promised her good pay, a clean placement, and no drama. The salary was 3 times what any similar job paid anywhere else. She had not asked why. She had needed the answer to be yes, so she had said yes and booked her flight before anyone could change their mind. Her brother Marcus was 17. Just smart enough for college if she could keep his tuition paid. Her little sister Amara had asthma, and her medication was not cheap. Her mother worked double shifts back home, and the bills did not stop coming. Zara was the thread holding all of it together. She had learned early how to be invisible. It was not weakness. It was strategy. Keep your head down. Do your work better than anyone else. Don't give them a reason to notice you. Save your money. Go home. That was the entire plan. For the first 2 weeks, it had worked perfectly. Then Seo Yeon arrived. The staff called her the Storm. Not to her face, never to her face, but in the small back kitchen where they ate their meals and spoke in careful, low voices. That was the word they used. She is here. The storm is here. Be careful. Seo Yeon Park was 28. It's beautiful the way expensive and dangerous things are beautiful, and engaged to Kwon Jae-won through an arrangement decided between 2 powerful families long before either of them had a say. She wore her status like a weapon, and she had decided from the very first day she laid eyes on Zara that she had found her favorite target. It started small. A vase knocked over and blamed on Zara in front of guests, a task made deliberately impossible with a deadline made deliberately shorter. A comment dropped in passing, casual, smiling, cutting, about the standards of the household staff. Zara had taken it. Every single time. Swallowed it down and added it to the pile. Because Marcus's tuition was due. Because Amara needed her medication. Because her mother's bills did not pay themselves. But 2 days ago, in the middle of the afternoon, In front of every member of the household staff, Seo Yeon had picked up a full tray of hot tea. She had walked straight toward Zara. She had looked her dead in the eyes. She had smiled, and she had tipped the entire tray forward without a single moment of hesitation. The heat soaked through Zara's uniform immediately. The staff went completely silent. Seo Yeon tilted her head to one side, looking almost bored, and said, "Clean it up. That's what you're here for, isn't it?" 3 months collapsed into one single second, and Zara's hand made a decision that her mind was still trying to catch up with. Now she had 5 minutes to walk to the most powerful and dangerous man in Seoul's private study, in a tea-soaked uniform, with a hand that was still trembling. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, took one slow breath the way her mother had taught her when she was small and the world felt too big and too cruel. "You are built on your pride, Zara. Don't you ever let anyone take your foundation." She walked toward the study. Whatever was waiting for her behind that door, she would face it on her feet. The door to the study was already open, just slightly, just enough to tell her that he was expecting her, that he had left it that way on purpose. Zara stood in the hallway outside it, her hand raised to knock, and made herself breathe. 1 breath. 2. The marble floor was cold even through the soles of her shoes. The hallway was empty. Every other staff member had found somewhere else to be, which told her everything she needed to know about how serious this moment was. She knocked twice. "Come in." His voice was low and calm, the kind of voice that never needed to rise because it had never once needed to. Zara pushed the door open and walked in. The study was large and dark and smelled of cedar wood and old wood and something else underneath it that she could not quite place. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 2 walls. A single lamp burned on the desk in the center of the room, throwing a warm circle of light across stacked papers and a glass of water that had not been touched. Outside the tall window behind the desk, Seoul glittered in the early evening dark like scattered glass. Kwon Jae-won was standing with his back to her. He was looking out the window with both hands clasped behind him, still in the same dark suit from downstairs, and he did not turn around when she entered. He just said quietly, "Close the door." She closed it. The click of the latch sounded very loud. He turned around then, slowly. He moved to his desk and sat down, and for the first time Zara was close enough to see his face properly in the light. He was younger than she had expected, somewhere in his mid-30s, sharp features, dark eyes that held no warmth at all, but held something else instead. Focus, precision. The eyes of a man who never looked at anything without a reason. He looked at her steadily, without rushing, like he was making a decision he intended to get right. The silence stretched. Zara refused to fill it. She had learned in this house that silence was a weapon, and the first person to speak lost something. So she stood straight, her hands clasped in front of her, her chin level, and she waited. Even though her heart was slamming against her ribs, even though the tea stain on her uniform was still faintly damp, even though every sensible thought in her head was telling her that this man had the power to end her visa, her job, and her entire plan with a single phone call. She waited. His eyes moved to the stain on her uniform. He looked at it for exactly 1 second, then back at her face. "Sit down," he said. "I prefer to stand, sir," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite surprise. More like the slight adjustment a person makes when something lands differently than they expected. He leaned back in his chair slowly and folded his hands on the desk. "Tell me what happened," he said. "I struck your fiancé, sir," Zara said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of how steady it was. "I take full responsibility for that." "I didn't ask you to take responsibility," he said. "I asked you what happened." Zara looked at him directly. She poured a full tray of hot tea on me deliberately, in front of the entire staff. It was not the first time she had done something like that. It was the worst time. She paused. My hand responded before my mind could stop it. I am not going to pretend otherwise. The room was very quiet. Jae-won looked at her face without speaking for a long moment. His expression gave away nothing. No anger, no sympathy, no judgment. Just that focused, unreadable attention. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. 3 months, sir." "And in those 3 months," he said slowly, "how many times has she done something like this to you?" Zara blinked. She had not expected that question. "More times than I can count precisely," she said carefully, "and you said nothing." "No, sir." "Why?" She held his gaze. "Because I need this job." He was quiet again. He picked up the glass of water from his desk, looked at it briefly, and set it back down without drinking. Then he said, "You are not fired." Zara said nothing. She waited. "However," he continued, "you cannot remain in your current position. Miss Seo will not tolerate it, and I do not have time to manage the consequences of that conflict every day." He paused. "You are being reassigned. Effective tomorrow morning, you will serve as the household manager of this estate. You will oversee the domestic staff, manage the daily schedule of this residence, and report directly to me." Zara stared at him. She could not help it. "Sir?" "You heard me correctly," he said. "That is a promotion," she said slowly. "Yes," he said, "it is." She searched his face for the catch, for the angle, for whatever this was really about. Because nothing in this house was ever simple, and nothing that came from this man was ever without a reason. "Why?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment. "Because every person in that hall downstairs saw what happened today," he said quietly. "Most of them had been in this house for years. Not one of them had ever done what you did." "What I did was reckless," Zara said. "Yes," he agreed. "It was also honest." He stood up from the desk, slow and deliberate, and walked toward the window again. "I have very little use for people who are not honest." He paused. "Your name?" "I do not think I have it." "Zara," she said. "Zara Mensah." He repeated her name once, quietly, like he was placing it somewhere specific in his mind. "Miss Mensah." He kept his back to her. "You will begin your new role tomorrow. The housekeeper will brief you tonight on your new responsibilities." It was a dismissal, clean and final. Zara turned toward the door. Her hand was on the handle when his voice came again, still quiet, still not turning around. "Miss Mensah." She stopped. "The next time someone in this house puts their hands on you," he said, "you come to me first." The words landed in a way she was not prepared for. Not like a threat. Not quite like protection either. Like a door opening just slightly in a wall she had thought was completely solid. She opened the door and walked out. Behind her, the study was silent. She walked back down that corridor, and she understood one thing clearly. Whatever came next, it would not be simple, and it would not be safe. But for the first time in 3 months, she did not feel like she was facing it alone. She did not know yet whether that was a comfort or a warning. Down the corridor, behind a half-closed door, Seo-yeon stood watching her walk away. Her cheek had stopped burning hours ago, but her eyes had not stopped watching, and her mind had not stopped planning. Seo-yeon did not sleep that night. Zara didn't know that yet. She didn't know a lot of things yet. She didn't know that Seo-yeon had stood behind that half-closed door long enough to hear every word that had come out of that study. She didn't know that by the time she had walked back to her small staff quarters at the far end of the East Wing, changed out of her tea-stained uniform, and sat on the edge of her bed staring at the wall, Seo-yeon was already on her phone. already talking in a low, furious voice to someone who owed her a favor, already building something in the dark. Zara didn't know any of that. What she knew was that her hands had finally stopped shaking. She sat in the quiet of her small room, neat and sparse, everything in its place the way she needed it to be when everything outside of it was chaos. And she thought about the conversation in the study. She kept thinking about it, turning every word of that conversation over in her mind, looking for the part that made sense. He had not fired her. He had promoted her. He had stood in that study and looked at her like she was the most interesting person he had ever seen in his life. And then he had said, "The next time someone in this house puts their hands on you, you come to me first." She pressed her fingers to her temple and closed her eyes. "Don't," she told herself firmly, "don't make it something it isn't. He is a businessman. You are an employee. He made a practical decision tonight, nothing more." She believed about half of that. She set her alarm for 5:30, lay down on top of the covers fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling until sleep finally came for her just before midnight. She was up before the alarm. The housekeeper, Mrs. O, was already in the main kitchen when Zara arrived at 5:45. Mrs. O was a small, precise woman in her 60s who had worked in the Kwan estate for 11 years and had survived everything this house had ever thrown at her by being absolutely unreadable at all times. She looked Zara over when she walked in, handed her a hot cup of tea without a word, and then placed a leather-bound household schedule book on the counter between them. "This is yours now," Mrs. O said. "Everything runs through you. Staff rosters, supply orders, guest preparations, event coordination. If something breaks in this house, you fix it before he notices it is broken. If something is missing, you replace it before he looks for it. If there is conflict among the staff, you resolve it quietly." She paused. "He does not like noise." "Understood," Zara said. Mrs. O looked at her for a moment longer than necessary. "Ox, you are going to have a problem," she said simply. Zara wrapped both hands around her teacup. "I know. She will not let this go. I know that too." Mrs. O nodded once, as if that was the right answer, picked up her own cup, and walked out of the kitchen. The conversation was over. The job had begun. The first week was hard in the way that learning anything new while being watched closely is hard. Zara threw herself into it completely. She memorized the staff roster in 2 days. She restructured the supply ordering system that had been disorganized for months and saved the estate a significant amount on weekly costs. She resolved a long-standing tension between 2 senior staff members before it could become a disruption. She did everything Mrs. O had described, and then she did more. Because doing more was the only way she knew how to make herself secure. She barely crossed paths with Jaewon in those first days. He moved through the estate like a man who owned every room he walked into, powerful, unpredictable, and never staying in one place long enough for anyone to get comfortable. She would see him at the far end of a corridor, already in his coat and heading out before 7 in the morning. She would hear his voice behind closed doors in the evening, low and unhurried, while she made her final rounds of the residence. They did not speak directly, but she noticed that he noticed. Small things. The supply report she had restructured and left on the household management desk. She came in the next morning to find it had been moved, reviewed, set back down with a single line drawn in pen beside her cost-saving notes. No comment, no words. Just that one line that said, "I saw this. I noticed." She told herself it meant nothing. She almost believed it. It was on the 8th day that everything shifted. It was past midnight. Zara had stayed late reorganizing the East Wing storage inventory, a task that had been neglected for months and was bothering her more than it should have. The rest of the house was asleep. The corridors were dark except for the low safety lighting along the baseboards. The whole estate had gone completely still. The kind of stillness that only falls over a very large house very late at night when every room feels like it is holding its breath. She was on a stepladder in the storage room, reaching for a misplaced box on the top shelf, when she heard footsteps in the corridor. Unhurried, deliberate. She knew those footsteps already. She climbed down from the ladder and stepped into the corridor doorway just as Jae-won came around the corner. He was not in his suit. Dark trousers, a plain white shirt with the sleeves pushed up to his forearms, his hair slightly less controlled than it was during the day. He looked, for the first time since she had met him, like a normal person, like a man instead of a machine. He stopped when he saw her. "Miss Mensah," he said, "it is past midnight." "The East Wing inventory was 3 months behind, sir," she said. "I wanted it done before the weekend guest arrival." He looked past her into the storage room, then back at her. "Come with me," he said. She followed him down the corridor, through the main hall, and into the large private library at the north end of the estate. She had been in this room only once before, briefly during her initial house orientation. It was floor-to-ceiling books, 2 long reading tables, a fireplace that was currently burning low, and the smell of old paper and cedar wood that she was beginning to associate specifically with him. He walked to one of the reading tables and picked up a book he had clearly already been reading. He did not sit. He looked at the shelves along the far wall and said, without looking at her, "I want these reorganized, by region, then by period, not by author. The current system makes no sense to me." Zara looked at the shelves. There were hundreds of books. "Tonight, sir?" "No," he said. He almost sounded amused. "Almost." "This week, when you have time." She nodded. She turned to leave. "Where are you from, Miss Mensah?" he asked. She turned back. He was still looking at the shelves, his book held loosely at his side. The question had been casual, but nothing about this man was casual. She understood that already. "Atlanta," she said. "Georgia, born and raised." He was quiet for a moment. "You have siblings," he said. It was not a question. She went very still. "Yes. A brother and a sister," he said. He turned to look at her then. His expression was even, but his eyes were doing that thing again. That focused, deliberate attention that made her feel like the only person in whatever room they were both standing in. "I read the staff files when someone's role changes significantly." She held his gaze. "Then you know why I need this job." "Yes," he said simply. "I do." He looked back at the bookshelves. "You may go, Miss Mensah. Get some sleep." She left. But halfway down the corridor, she stopped walking. She pressed her back against the wall and closed her eyes. He had read her file. He knew about Marcus. He knew about Amara. He knew about her mother working double shifts, and the bills that never stopped coming. He had stood in that library at midnight and told her, without saying it directly, that he understood exactly how much she had to lose. She didn't know whether that made her feel safer or more exposed than she had ever felt in her life. What she did know was that somewhere in the West Wing, in the guest suite that had been kept ready for her return, Seo Yeon had come back. Zara had seen the black car pull through the estate gates that evening. She had seen the lights go on in the West Wing window. And she had felt it in her gut before her mind could explain it. Whatever small and fragile piece these 8 days had held was over. The storm was back, and this time it had 8 full days to plan. The first thing Seo Yeon did when she came back was smile at Zara. Not a real smile. Seo Yeon did not do real smiles. It was the kind of smile that sits on a person's face like a mask, wide enough to look pleasant, cold enough underneath to make the air around it feel 3 degrees cooler. She passed Zara in the main corridor the morning after her return, looked her up and down slowly, and smiled. Then she walked away without a single word. That was more frightening than anything she could have said. Zara wrote it down in the back of her mind, filed it carefully next to everything else she had been collecting over the past 8 days, and kept moving. She had a full schedule. Guest preparations for the weekend, staff roster adjustments, a supply delivery to oversee before 9. She did not have time to spend on Seo Yeon's silent games, but she kept her eyes open. The attack did not come from the direction she was watching. It never comes from the direction you are watching. It came on a Thursday afternoon, on Zara's first day off since her promotion. Mrs. O had told her firmly the previous evening that she was required to take it. "You cannot manage this house if you run yourself into the ground," she had said, in the flat tone she used when she was not actually giving you a choice. "You have Saturday and Sunday off every week. Take Thursday also. That is the rule." Zara had agreed, mostly because arguing with Mrs. O felt like arguing with a wall. She left the estate at noon. She took the subway to Insadong, walked slowly through the market stalls, bought a small bag of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor, and let herself breathe for the first time in over a week. Seoul in the afternoon was loud and bright and completely unbothered by her problems. Nobody here knew her name. Nobody here knew who she worked for. Nobody here looked at her with that careful, watchful staff house expression. She was just a woman walking through a market, and it felt wonderful. She stayed for 2 hours. She called her mother. She listened to Marcus talk for 20 minutes about a girl in his class whose name he mentioned 4 times without seeming to notice he kept mentioning it, and she laughed properly for the first time in days. She started walking back toward the subway station at 3:30. She noticed the men when she turned off the main street, 2 of them, standing near the mouth of the narrow side street she used as a shortcut toward the station. They were not doing anything specific, just standing, but something about the way they were positioned, the way they were not quite looking at her but were completely aware of her, made the back of her neck go cold. She slowed her steps. She thought about turning back. She turned back. She made it exactly 4 steps before she heard footsteps behind her, moving fast, and then a hand closed around her arm and pulled her sideways into the narrow alley between 2 buildings. There were 3 of them, not 2. The third had come from the other direction. "Miss Mensah," the one holding her arm said. His Korean was rough around the edges, and his grip was not. "We have a message for you." Zara's heart was slamming. Her bag was still on her shoulder. Her phone was in her coat pocket. She ran a fast, cold calculation in her head: scream, fight, run, and found that none of those options had a clean ending in a narrow alley with 3 men and no witnesses. "From who?" she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. She was proud of that. The man smiled. It reminded her of Seo Yeon's smile this morning, the same temperature. "From someone who wants you to understand that your position in that house is temporary," he said, "and that it would be much better for everyone, especially for you, if you resigned tonight, packed your things, left Seoul." "And if I don't?" Zara said. He tilted his head. "Then your brother's college application has a problem. Then your sister's medication supply has a problem." He leaned closer. "Then you have a problem." What moved through Zara in that moment was not fear. Fear would have made her want to run. This was something different. This was fury, pure and quiet and completely focused. She had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to let someone use the people she loved as leverage against her. Her jaw tightened. "Tell your employer," she said quietly, "that she should have tried harder." The man's smile disappeared. He pulled his hand back, and then, from the entrance of the alley came a sound. 1 pair of footsteps, unhurried, deliberate. Each step landing slowly and deliberately, like a man who had already decided how this was going to end. All three men turned. Kwon Jae-won walked into the alley alone. No security team behind him. No visible weapon. Just him in his dark coat, hands in his pockets, moving at the same unhurried pace he used to walk down his own staircase. Like he had all the time in the world, like he had simply been passing by and decided to stop. The temperature in the alley dropped. Zara watched the three men process who they were looking at. She watched it happen in real time. The recognition, then the understanding, then the complete and total collapse of confidence. The man who had been holding her arm took one step backward, then another. Jae-won stopped walking. He looked at the three men with the same expression he used for everything, even unreadable, absolutely unhurried. Then he said something quietly in Korean that Zara could not fully translate, but she understood the meaning of it perfectly. She could see it in the way those three men looked at each other. She could see it in the way they left. They left, quickly, without another word. The alley was silent. Jae-won turned to look at Zara. She was still standing exactly where she had been, back straight, chin level. Her hands were trembling slightly, and she hated that. She pressed them flat against her sides. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No," she said. He looked at her for a moment, the way he always looked at her, direct and precise, and then he turned toward the alley entrance. "Come," he said simply. She followed him out to a black car idling at the curb. He opened the rear door. She got in. He walked around and got in on the other side. The car pulled away from the curb smoothly and joined the flow of Seoul's afternoon traffic. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The city moved past the windows in streaks of light and sound. Zara stared at it and worked on making her breathing even. Beside her, Jae-won sat with the same stillness he carried everywhere, looking straight ahead. "How did you know where I was?" she asked. "I have people," he said simply. "You had me followed?" The edge in her voice was real. He turned to look at her. "I had you protected," he said. "There is a difference." She held his gaze. "You should have told me." "Yes," he said, "just that. No argument, no justification. Just a quiet acknowledgement that landed differently than she expected. The silence came back, but it was a different kind of silence now. Something had shifted in it. Something had cracked slightly open. "She threatened my brother," Zara said. Her voice was low and tight. "She threatened my sister's medication." Jae-won said nothing, but she saw his jaw tighten. Once, just slightly, just enough. "I need you to understand something," she said. She turned in her seat to face him fully because she needed him to see that she was not shaking anymore. She was not afraid anymore. She was clear. "I am not going to resign. I am not going to run. I have 2 people at home depending on every payment I send. I have a job to do, and I'm going to do it." She paused. "But I will not be used as a pawn in whatever is between you and her. I am not a piece on your board, Mr. Kwon. I am a person." The car was very quiet. Jae-won looked at her for a long time, longer than he usually allowed himself to look at anything. Something moved behind his eyes, something that he was not trying to hide anymore. Something that had been there for a while and had finally decided to stop pretending it wasn't. "I know that," he said quietly. "I have known that since the moment I saw you standing in that hall." The words settled over everything and changed the temperature of the entire car. Then he looked away. He reached into his jacket pocket, took out his phone, and made one call. 3 sentences, quiet and final. When he put the phone away, he said, without looking at her, Your brother's application is protected. Your sister's medication supply will not be interrupted, and Miss Seo's engagement to me ends tonight." Zara stared at him. "Mr. Kwon?" "It was already ending," he said simply. "You did not cause this. You only made the timing clear." She did not know what to say to that. For the first time in a very long time, Zara Mensah did not have words ready. She turned back to the window and watched Seoul slide past and felt the weight of what was happening settle slowly and heavily around her. Behind them, somewhere in the city, 3 men were making a phone call they did not want to make. And in the west wing of the Kwon estate, Seo Yeon's phone was about to ring. Seo Yeon's scream could be heard from the east wing. Zara was back in her quarters, sitting on the edge of her bed with a cup of tea she had not touched when it happened. The sound tore through the quiet of the estate like something that had been building for a very long time and had finally run out of patience. Then came the rapid crack of heels in the corridor, a door slamming hard enough to rattle the walls, and then voices, Seo Yeon's high and furious, and underneath it, Jaewon's, low and unmovable as stone. Then silence, the kind of silence that comes after something final. Zara set her cup down on the nightstand. She pressed both palms flat against her thighs and stared at the floor. She was not going to walk to that corridor. She was not going to stand at a door and listen. She had spent 3 months making herself invisible in this house, and she understood, clearly and completely, that whatever was happening in that room right now was not something she should be anywhere near. But she also understood, just as clearly, that she was already in the middle of it. She had been there since the moment her hand moved in that receiving hall, and she was only just now understanding how deep the middle actually was. Seo Yeon left before midnight. Zara heard the cars, 2 of them pulling around to the main entrance, just doors opening and closing, the sound of luggage being loaded with the rough, angry energy of people who are furious and trying to move fast. She did not go to the window. She lay on her bed in the dark and listened to the estate settle around the absence of the storm, and slowly, gradually, the house went quiet again. A different kind of quiet than before, heavier, more uncertain. The kind of quiet that sits in a house after something big has happened and nobody knows what comes next. The questions arrived with breakfast. Zara came into the main kitchen at 6 the next morning to find 3 staff members already there who went silent the moment she walked in. Mrs. O was at the counter, her back straight, her expression giving nothing away as usual. She handed Zara her tea, looked at her once, and said quietly, "They are talking." "I know," Zara said. "Not just the staff," Mrs. O said. She paused. "The families." Zara wrapped her hands around her cup. "Which families?" Mrs. O looked at her steadily. "All of them." She understood what that meant by noon. The Kwon estate was not simply a private residence. It was the center of a network that stretched across Seoul's most powerful criminal syndicate. A web of families and alliances and agreements that had been built over decades and held together by carefully managed relationships, arranged partnerships, and the absolute unspoken rule that personal decisions were never purely personal. They belonged to the network. They affected everyone. Jaewon ending his engagement to Seoyeon Park was not a personal decision to those families. It was a disruption, a fracture, a signal that something had shifted at the very top of the network. And in their world, shifts at the top sent tremors all the way down to the bottom. The syndicate was restless. People were talking. Meetings were being called. Alliances were being quietly questioned. Because when the most powerful man at the top makes an unexpected move, everyone below him starts wondering what it means for them. And at the center of that fracture, as far as every one of those families was concerned, was a young black woman who had slapped the wrong person and caught the wrong man's attention. By 2 in the afternoon, Zara had received 3 separate warnings. The first came from a junior staff member who pulled her aside in the corridor and whispered, with genuine fear in his eyes, that he had overheard one of the syndicate associates on a phone call that morning. The second came from Mrs. O, who placed a folded piece of paper on Zara's desk without explanation. Inside was a single sentence written in careful English. "Leave before they make you leave." The third came in the form of a black car that sat outside the estate gates for 2 hours that afternoon without moving. Just sitting there, watching. Zara read all 3 warnings. She folded Mrs. O's note carefully and put it in her pocket. She thanked the junior staff member and told him to go about his work. She looked at the black car from the window of the east wing for a long moment. Then she went back to her desk and continued working. J1 found her there at 7 that evening. She heard him before she saw him. Those unhurried footsteps in the corridor outside her office, stopping at her open door. She did not look up immediately. She finished the line she was writing in the household log, set her pen down, and then looked up. He was leaning against the door frame with his arms crossed, still in his suit from whatever meetings had consumed his day, watching her with that expression she had come to recognize, the one that was not quite unreadable anymore, the one that had something underneath it now, something she could see clearly even if she was not yet ready to say its name out loud. "You did not leave," he said. "No," she said. "You received warnings." 3, she said. "I counted." Something moved in his expression. "And?" She leaned back in her chair and looked at him directly. "I told you in that car, Mr. Kwan, I am not going to run. I have never run from anything in my life, and I do not intend to start now." She paused. "But I need to understand what is happening. Not the version where you manage it quietly and I find out afterward. The real version. I need to know what ending that engagement means for this network and what it means for me." He was quiet for a moment. Then he walked into the room, pulled the chair across from her desk, turned it around, and sat down with his arms resting across the back of it. It was the most informal she had ever seen him sit. It caught her off guard in a way she did not let show. "The Park family has called an emergency meeting of the Syndicate Council," he said. "They want a formal explanation for the broken engagement. They are framing it as an insult to their family and a breach of agreement." He looked at her steadily. "They will argue that an outside party influenced the decision." "Me?" Zara said flatly. "Yes." "And what happens at that meeting?" "They will demand your removal from this estate," he said, formally, through the council. The room was very still. "And if I am not removed?" she asked. "Then they will try other methods," he said. His voice was even, but the meaning underneath it was not. The black car outside the gate today was a message. They are watching. They are waiting to see what I do next. Zara looked at him for a long moment. "What are you going to do next?" He held her gaze. "I am going to the council meeting tomorrow," he said, "and I'm going to tell them that you are under my personal protection, that any move against you is a move against me, that the Kwan name covers you completely and absolutely." He paused. "That is not a small thing in my world, Miss Mensah. When I say that in that room tomorrow, it changes everything. It means every family in that network knows that you are untouchable." The weight of what he was saying settled over her slowly. "That will cause more disruption," she said carefully. "Not less." "Yes," he said. "You would do that?" she said. "Disrupt your entire network, create conflict with the Park family, spend your political capital for a maid?" He looked at her for a long time before he answered. "No," he said quietly, "not for a maid." The air between them shifted. Zara felt it. She knew he felt it too. It was the kind of shift that does not make a sound. It just arrives quietly and suddenly the room feels completely different than it did 1 second ago. She stood up from her desk. She needed to be on her feet for this. She walked to the window and looked out at the city lights for a moment, gathering herself, and then she turned around to face him. "I need to say something to you," she said, "and I need you to actually hear it." He stood up from the chair. He was looking at her with that full, focused attention, all of it, nothing held back. "I am not Seo Yeon," she said. "I am not a political arrangement. I am not a symbol of something or a statement to your network or a replacement for whatever that engagement was supposed to be." Her voice was steady and clear. "I am a 26-year-old woman who came to Seoul to work hard and send money home to her family. That is who I am. And if whatever this is," she gestured slightly between them, "is going to be anything real, then it has to start from that. From me being a person who has a choice, not a person who is protected because someone powerful decided to claim her." Silence. Jaewon stood very still. Then, slowly, he did something that she would think about for a very long time afterward. Something that every member of his staff, every associate in his network, every person who had ever sat across from Kwon Jae-won in any room would have said was simply not something he did. He took a breath, and he said, quietly and without any armor around it at all, "Then choose." Just that. 2 words. The same weight as everything else he had ever said, and somehow heavier than all of it combined. No pressure behind them, no threat, no angle. It's just an open door held by a man who had spent his entire life making sure no door was ever open unless he controlled what was on the other side of it. Zara looked at him. This man who had watched her from a balcony and seen something worth seeing. Who had read her file and understood what she had to lose, who had walked alone into a dark alley and sent 3 men away with just a few quiet words, who had ended an engagement that served his empire because something had become more important to him than his empire, who was standing in her small office at 7 in the evening in his perfectly tailored suit, asking her, not telling her, not maneuvering her, not protecting her without her consent, but simply and honestly asking her, "Choose." The city glittered behind her through the window. Somewhere across Seoul, a council meeting was being scheduled. The Park family was making phone calls. The black car had finally moved away from the gate an hour ago, which meant it had gone somewhere to report. None of that had gone away. None of it would be simple. She knew exactly what she was walking toward if she said yes. The danger of it. The complexity of it. The weight of living inside a world this powerful as yourself. Not as an arrangement, not as a symbol, but as a woman who had made a choice with her eyes wide open. She also knew, standing in this room right now, exactly who she was. She had always known. Her mother had made sure of that. Her mother's voice came quietly from somewhere in the back of her mind. "You are built on your pride, Zara. Don't you ever let anyone take your foundation." She looked at Kwon Jae-won, and she felt her foundation, solid and real and entirely her own, underneath her feet. She took 1 step toward him, and she said, "I am going to need you to understand something first." His eyes did not leave hers. "I choose on my terms," she said. "Not the network's terms, not the council's terms, mine." She held his gaze. "Can you live with that?" The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then, for the first time since she had come to work in this estate, Kwon Jae-won smiled. It was small and quiet and completely real, and it changed his face entirely. "Yes," he said. The word landed like a beginning. Outside the estate, Seoul moved and breathed and hummed with its million lives and its million secrets. The council meeting was coming. The road ahead was complicated and dangerous, and full of things that had not yet been resolved. But inside this small office, in the warm circle of lamplight, something had been decided that no council and no family and no network had any power over, because it had been chosen freely by both of them. And in Jaewon's world, where everything was calculated and controlled and given only when it served a purpose, that was the rarest and most dangerous thing of all. Something real. Thank you so much for watching the story. A hardworking maid and the most feared mafia boss in Seoul. The most dangerous love story to ever come out of a marble estate. If you enjoyed this story, kindly hit that like button right now. Let us get it to 1,000 likes because Zara deserves it. Subscribe because I post stories like this every single day. Mafia romances, forbidden love, and plot twists that will wreck you in the best way. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have slapped her back like Zara did? Would you stay knowing an entire syndicate was coming for you? Thank you for watching. If you made it this far, you are the real MVP. Stay romantic, stay safe, and maybe stay away from mafia bosses unless they are fictional. I will see you in the next one.